June 14, 1986, and the small town of Millbrook, Ohio, was celebrating its annual summer festival with carnival rides, food vendors, and live music in the town square, an event that brought together the community's 4,000 residents. The festival occupied several blocks of downtown Millbrook with streets closed to traffic, and families gathered to enjoy the warm Saturday afternoon and the traditions that had defined the town for generations. Lily Harper was 7 years old that day, a small girl with long auburn hair her mother had braided that morning, bright green eyes and a spattering of freckles across her nose and cheeks. She wore a yellow sundress with white flowers that her grandmother had made for her birthday, white sandals, and a small purse shaped like a ladybug that contained $2 for buying treats at the festival. Lily had come to the festival with her mother, Karen Harper, a single parent who worked as a nurse at Millbrook General Hospital, and they'd spent the afternoon riding the carousel and eating cotton candy. At 4:15 p.m., Karen and Lily were standing near the face painting booth, watching other children get their faces decorated with butterflies and tigers, and Lily asked if she could get her face painted too. The face painting line was about 10 children long, and Karen agreed to let Lily wait in line while she went to a nearby lemonade stand about 30 feet away to buy drinks for both of them. "Stay right here in this line," Karen instructed. "Don't move from this spot. I can see you from the lemonade stand and I'll be back before it's your turn." Lily nodded and took her place in line behind a girl with pigtails, and Karen walked to the lemonade stand, keeping her eyes on her daughter's yellow sundress, which was easy to spot in the crowd. The lemonade stand had a short line, maybe 4 people ahead of Karen, and she waited while keeping visual contact with Lily, who was patiently standing in the face painting queue. At approximately 4:22 p.m., Karen reached the front of the lemonade line and turned to order 2 lemonades, a transaction that took maybe 30 seconds as she paid and received the drinks. When Karen turned back toward the face painting booth with 2 lemonades in hand, Lily was no longer in the line, and the yellow sundress was nowhere visible among the crowd of children. Karen's first thought was that Lily had stepped out of line to use the bathroom or had gotten distracted by something, and she walked quickly to the face painting booth, asking the woman painting if she'd seen where the little girl in the yellow dress had gone. "She was right here a minute ago," the face painter said. "I remember the yellow dress, but I didn't see her leave the line. I was focused on the child I was painting." Within seconds, Karen was calling Lily's name and searching the immediate area around the face painting booth, checking behind vendor tents, and asking other parents if they'd seen a 7-year-old in a yellow sundress. By 4:30 p.m., Karen was panicking and had alerted festival security that her daughter was missing, and within minutes announcements were being broadcast asking Lily Harper to come to the information booth and requesting all adults watch for a missing child. In approximately 8 minutes, while her mother stood 30 feet away buying lemonade, 7-year-old Lily Harper vanished from a crowded festival in broad daylight without anyone seeing where she went. If you want to hear how DNA finally solved this decades-old mystery, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that like button and comment where you're watching from. Now let's see what happened next. Millbrook police were called at 4:35 p.m., and officers Michael Chen and Sarah Davis arrived to find Karen Harper hysterical and over 50 people searching the festival grounds calling Lily's name. The festival was immediately shut down with all exits blocked, and police began the process of accounting for every child present and searching every vendor tent, bathroom, and vehicle in the area. The face painting line was interviewed extensively, with officers asking each child and parent if they'd seen what happened to Lily, or noticed anyone talking to her before she disappeared. A 10-year-old boy named Timothy Walsh told police he'd seen a woman talking to Lily, and then Lily had walked away with her, and he'd assumed it was Lily's mother or an aunt. "The lady bent down and said something to her," Timothy explained, "and then Lily took her hand and they walked toward the parking area, but I didn't think anything was wrong because the lady seemed nice." This information immediately transformed the investigation from a lost child situation to a potential abduction, and detectives began interviewing witnesses about any woman seen with Lily. Timothy worked with a sketch artist to create a composite of the woman he'd seen. White female, approximately 35 to 45 years old, brown hair in a ponytail, wearing sunglasses and a blue t-shirt. The description was frustratingly generic, matching dozens of women who'd been at the festival, but it gave investigators something concrete to pursue and witnesses to search for. Karen was interviewed extensively about whether anyone had been paying unusual attention to Lily during the festival, or if she'd noticed anyone following them, but she insisted she'd seen nothing concerning. By 6 p.m., over 200 volunteers were searching Millbrook and surrounding areas, checking parks and vacant buildings and wooded areas where a child might have been taken or hidden. Bloodhounds were brought from Columbus and given Lily's scent from a blanket in Karen's car, and the dogs tracked from the face-painting booth toward the festival parking area before losing the trail completely. The fact that the scent ended in the parking lot suggested Lily had been placed in a vehicle and driven away, and roadblocks were established on highways leading out of Millbrook, checking every car for any sign of the missing girl. FBI Special Agent Robert Morrison arrived from the Cleveland field office at 8 p.m. and took over coordination of what was now officially being treated as a child abduction case. Agent Morrison focused immediately on the woman Timothy had described, and he interviewed every woman who'd been at the festival, asking for alibis and checking for anyone who matched the composite sketch. One woman named Patricia Ellis raised initial suspicion because she matched the general description and had been seen near the face painting area, but she had witnesses confirming she'd been with her own children the entire afternoon. The yellow sundress Lily had been wearing became the focus of intensive searching, with investigators hoping the distinctive garment might be spotted or reported somewhere, but no sightings were confirmed. Karen appeared on local television that evening pleading for Lily's return, and she begged whoever had taken her daughter to please let her go somewhere safe where she could be found. "Lily is only 7 years old," Karen sobbed on camera. "She needs her asthma medication and she'll be scared without her mother. Please, if you have her, just let her go and we won't ask questions." The broadcast generated hundreds of tips from people claiming to have seen Lily or the woman in the blue t-shirt, and every lead was investigated through the night by teams of FBI agents and local police. By Sunday morning, the case had become regional news, with Lily's photo appearing on television screens across Ohio, and the description of her distinctive yellow sundress was broadcast repeatedly. Investigators canvassed neighborhoods within a 50-mile radius of Millbrook, knocking on doors and showing Lily's photo, asking if anyone had seen the girl or noticed suspicious activity on Saturday. One particularly compelling lead came from a gas station attendant in a town 30 miles from Millbrook, who reported seeing a woman with a young girl matching Lily's description on Saturday evening around 7 p.m. "The girl seemed quiet and wasn't talking," the attendant recalled. "The woman bought snacks and gas, paid cash, and they drove off in a tan sedan. I didn't get the license plate because I didn't know to look for it." This sighting was investigated thoroughly, but despite intensive efforts to track the tan sedan, investigators couldn't locate the vehicle or verify it was actually Lily the attendant had seen. By Monday, the intensive search had expanded to cover a 100-mile radius, and the FBI had launched a national alert with Lily's description and photo distributed to law enforcement agencies across the country. Karen's background was investigated to rule out family involvement, and her ex-husband, Lily's father, was located in California and verified to have been 3,000 miles away when Lily disappeared. The theory that someone at the festival had been watching Lily and waiting for an opportunity emerged as the most likely scenario, and investigators reviewed everything known about registered sex offenders in the region. One man named Donald Pierce, who lived in a neighboring town, had a prior conviction for child endangerment in 1979, and his home was searched by warrant looking for any evidence connecting him to Lily. Pierce's alibi was verified through work records showing he'd been on shift at a factory during the festival, and forensic examination of his home and vehicle found nothing linking him to the missing girl. By the end of June, the intensive daily search operations had been scaled back, and the grim reality settled that Lily was likely dead, though her body hadn't been found. Karen quit her nursing job and dedicated every waking hour to searching for her daughter, distributing flyers and organizing volunteer search parties that continued for months. The case was featured on America's Most Wanted in late 1986, and the broadcast generated thousands of new tips, but as with everything else, each lead was investigated and found to go nowhere. Months became a year and then 2 years, and Lily Harper became one of hundreds of children who'd vanished in the 1980s and were never found despite exhaustive searches and investigations. Karen never gave up hope, maintaining Lily's bedroom exactly as it had been and keeping age progression photos updated, showing what her daughter might look like as she got older. The yellow sundress her grandmother had made became a symbol of the case, and memorial services held on each anniversary of Lily's disappearance featured yellow ribbons tied around trees in Millbrook's town square. Agent Morrison kept the case active and reviewed it periodically, but without physical evidence or credible witnesses, there was simply nothing to pursue except the hope that someday Lily's body would be found. The years passed with painful slowness for Karen Harper, with 1986 becoming 1995 and then 2005, and Lily's empty bedroom remained a shrine to the daughter who'd vanished from a summer festival. Karen never remarried and worked multiple jobs to fund ongoing searches and private investigators, unable to accept that her daughter was gone without knowing what had happened or where Lily might be. Age progression photos were created showing what Lily might look like at 10, then 16, then 25, and these images were distributed through missing persons databases and featured on websites dedicated to cold cases. Detective James Morrison, who'd taken over the case in 2000, periodically reviewed the evidence and followed up on tips that occasionally came in, but decades had passed without any breakthrough. The woman in the blue t-shirt that Timothy Walsh had described was never identified, despite the composite sketch being shown to millions of people over the years, and she remained the case's most frustrating, unsolved element. Karen appeared on various true crime programs over the decades, keeping Lily's case in the public eye, and she never stopped believing that someday answers would come, even as hope faded with each passing year. In 2010, human remains were discovered in a wooded area about 60 miles from Millbrook, and Karen received the call she'd been dreading for 24 years, uncertain whether to hope or despair. DNA testing took 3 agonizing weeks, and when results came back, they showed the remains belonged to a different missing child from the 1990s, and Karen experienced the familiar devastating cycle of hope and disappointment. By 2015, Lily would have been 36 years old, possibly with a career and family of her own if she'd somehow survived, though Karen knew in her heart that her daughter had likely died in 1986. Detective Sarah Chen was assigned to Ohio's cold case unit in 2020 and began systematically reviewing unsolved disappearances from the 1980s, applying genealogical DNA techniques that had recently solved several decades-old cases. When Chen reached the Lily Harper case file, she was struck by the complete absence of physical evidence and the fact that Lily had seemingly vanished without leaving any trace that could be analyzed. However, Chen decided to approach the case differently, focusing not on finding Lily but on identifying the woman Timothy Walsh had seen taking her, reasoning that finding the abductor might lead to answers. Chen used age progression technology on the 1986 composite sketch to show what the woman might look like in 2020, and she distributed these updated images through social media and law enforcement networks. Within weeks, a tip came from a woman in Pennsylvania who recognized the aged composite as resembling her deceased aunt, Diane Brennan, who died in 2018 from complications related to Alzheimer's disease. Chen immediately investigated Diane Brennan's background and discovered chilling connections. Brennan had lived in Ohio in the 1980s, had lost her own daughter to leukemia in 1984, and had undergone psychiatric treatment for severe depression. Most significantly, Brennan's medical record showed she'd been treated at a mental health facility in 1987 for delusions about having a daughter who was alive and well, and she'd consistently referred to a child named Emma. Chen obtained a warrant to access Brennan's complete records and personal effects stored by family members, and she discovered journals from the late 1980s that mentioned caring for a young girl she called Emma. Emma came to live with me in June 1986. One entry read, "She was scared at first, but she's adjusting well, and I'm teaching her that I'm her mother now and she's safe with me." This revelation sent Chen into intensive investigation mode, tracking down everyone who'd known Diane Brennan in the years after 1986, asking about the mysterious child she'd claimed to have. Brennan's sister Margaret, now 78 and living in Pittsburgh, confirmed that Diane had introduced her to a young girl named Emma in late 1986, claiming she'd adopted the child privately. The girl had auburn hair and seemed withdrawn, Margaret recalled. Diane was very protective of her and wouldn't let me spend much time alone with her, which I thought was odd but attributed to Diane being overprotective after losing her biological daughter. Margaret had lost touch with Diane in 1988 when Diane moved out of state without providing a forwarding address, and when they'd reconnected years later, Diane had been alone with no mention of Emma. "I asked what happened to the little girl and Diane became very upset," Margaret explained. "She said Emma had been taken from her by authorities, and she refused to discuss it further, so I never brought it up again." Chen searched social services records from the late 1980s, looking for any children removed from Diane Brennan's custody, and after weeks of investigation, she found a case file from 1989. The file listed Emma Brennan, approximately 10 years old, removed from home in Newark, Ohio, due to mother's psychiatric instability and concerns about the child's origins. Chen's heart raced as she calculated that a 10-year-old in 1989 would have been about 7 in 1986, matching Lily's age when she disappeared from the Millbrook Festival. The social services file showed that Emma Brennan had been placed in foster care in Newark, Ohio in 1989, after teachers at her school reported concerns about her inability to remember her early childhood. The child had told school counselors that she couldn't recall anything before living with Diane, and when pressed about her parents, she'd become confused and distressed, prompting a welfare investigation. Social workers had interviewed Diane extensively about Emma's background, and Diane had provided inconsistent stories about adopting the child through private channels, but she couldn't produce valid adoption paperwork. When authorities threatened to involve police, Diane had suffered a mental breakdown and been hospitalized, and Emma had been removed from the home and placed with a foster family in Columbus. The file showed Emma had remained in foster care through her teenage years, eventually being adopted by the Richardson family in 1994, when she was approximately 15 years old. Chen tracked down the Richardson family and discovered that their adopted daughter, Emma, was now 45 years old, married, working as a teacher in Cincinnati, and living under the name Emma Richardson Moore. Chen contacted Emma and requested a meeting to discuss important information about her childhood, and Emma agreed, though she was confused about what a cold case detective might want after so many years. When they met, Chen carefully explained that Emma might be Lily Harper, a child who'd been abducted from a festival in Millbrook in 1986, and that DNA testing could confirm her true identity. "I don't remember anything before I was about 8 or 9, Emma said slowly. "I've always assumed that was normal, that young childhood memories just fade, but therapists have told me it's unusual to have such complete memory loss." Emma described vague impressions of a woman she'd called mother, of moving frequently between apartments, of being told her name was Emma, and that her previous parents had died in an accident. "Diane told me I'd been in a car accident that killed my parents, and that's why I didn't remember them," Emma explained. "I had no reason to question it, because I was just a child, and she was the only mother I knew." Chen showed Emma photos of Lily Harper from 1986, and while Emma couldn't definitively recognize herself, the resemblance was striking, particularly the auburn hair and green eyes and pattern of freckles. DNA samples were collected from Emma and compared against Karen Harper's genetic profile that had been entered into databases decades earlier, and Chen waited anxiously for results that would take 2 weeks. When the laboratory results came back in November 2023, they showed a 99.99% probability that Emma Richardson Moore was biologically Lily Harper, the child who disappeared from an Ohio festival 37 years earlier. The confirmation that Lily had been found alive sent shockwaves through the cold case community and made national headlines. A missing child from 1986 discovered living a normal life under a different identity. Karen Harper, now 68 and in declining health, received the call on a Tuesday morning and collapsed, sobbing in her kitchen, overwhelmed by emotions too complex to process after nearly 4 decades of searching. "My baby is alive," Karen kept repeating to Detective Chen. "Lily is alive. She's been alive this whole time. Oh God, she's alive, and I thought I'd never see her again." The revelation was equally devastating for Emma, who had to reconcile the fact that she was Lily Harper, that she'd been stolen from a loving mother, and that her entire identity had been built on an abduction. "How do I process this?" Emma asked her husband through tears. "I'm 45 years old. I've built an entire life as Emma Richardson, and now I'm being told I'm someone else entirely, and my first 7 years were a lie." Chen handled the situation with extraordinary sensitivity, connecting Emma with therapists who specialized in recovered missing persons, and the complex trauma of discovering your identity had been stolen. The meeting between Emma and Karen was arranged for December 2023 at a neutral location with counselors present, and both women approached the reunion with decades of grief and loss, creating complex emotions. Karen recognized elements of Lily in Emma's face despite the decades that had transformed a 7-year-old into a middle-aged woman, and she brought photos to show Emma the little girl she'd been. "I'm sorry I looked away," Karen said through tears. "I was 30 feet away buying lemonade, and in those few seconds someone took you, and I've blamed myself every day for 37 years. Emma looked at photos of herself as Lily, seeing the yellow sundress and the braided auburn hair, and she felt grief for the life stolen from her and the mother who'd never stopped searching. "This isn't your fault," Emma told Karen gently. "You were being a mother, buying your daughter a treat. You couldn't have known someone was watching and waiting for that moment." The two women held each other crying, strangers connected by biology and tragedy, beginning the difficult process of building a relationship across 37 years of separation. Chen's investigation confirmed that Diane Brennan had been at the Millbrook Festival on June 14, 1986, though she'd lived in a different town and had told no one she was going. The investigation into Diane Brennan's actions revealed a heartbreaking pattern of mental illness and obsession that had led to Lily's abduction and years of living under a false identity. Brennan's psychiatric records showed she'd never recovered from losing her biological daughter to leukemia in 1984, and she'd developed delusions about replacing the child she'd lost with another girl. She'd apparently been attending public events looking for a child who resembled her deceased daughter, and when she'd seen Lily at the Millbrook Festival, the resemblance had triggered her to act impulsively. Witness statements collected in 2023 from people who'd known Brennan in the late 1980s confirmed she'd had a young girl living with her, and several remembered thinking it odd that Diane wouldn't discuss the child's background. "She was very secretive about Emma," one former neighbor recalled. "She didn't enroll her in school for the first year, and when she finally did, she provided minimal paperwork and seemed nervous about anyone asking questions." Brennan had moved frequently between 1986 and 1989, likely trying to avoid detection, and she'd kept Lily isolated from extended family and neighbors who might have recognized her from missing persons reports. The fact that Diane Brennan had died in 2018 meant she could never be held legally accountable for abducting Lily, and this reality was difficult for Karen to accept despite her relief at finding her daughter alive. "Part of me wishes Diane was still alive so she could face justice," Karen told reporters. "But another part is grateful because it means Lily, Emma, whoever she is now, doesn't have to testify or relive the trauma in court." Emma struggled with the complexity of her feelings about Diane, unable to hate the woman who'd raised her for 3 years, even knowing she'd been stolen from her real mother. "Diane wasn't cruel to me during the time I was with her," Emma explained to her therapist. "She was mentally ill and delusional, and in her mind, she was saving me or giving me a better life, even though what she did was terrible." The Richardson family, who'd adopted Emma in 1994, supported her journey to reconnect with Karen, while affirming that Emma would always be their daughter, regardless of how she'd come into their lives. Emma chose to maintain the name she'd lived with for 37 years while legally reclaiming Harper as part of her surname, becoming Emma Richardson Harper Moore, a name honoring all the pieces of her complicated identity. She established a foundation to help other families searching for missing children and to support adults who discover they were abducted as children, turning her experience into advocacy. Karen and Emma developed a careful relationship over the following year, meeting monthly and slowly building trust and connection, though both acknowledged it would never replace the mother-daughter bond they'd been robbed of. "I missed her first day of school, her graduation, her wedding, the birth of her children," Karen said in interviews. "I got her back, but I'll never get those years back, and that's something I have to learn to live with." Emma introduced Karen to her 2 teenage children, Karen's grandchildren who'd grown up not knowing they had a biological grandmother in Ohio who'd been searching for their mother. The case brought renewed attention to the inadequate documentation practices for private adoptions in the 1980s and led to reforms in Ohio's adoption laws requiring more thorough verification of children's origins. Detective Chen received commendations for solving the 37-year-old cold case, and her use of genealogical DNA and age progression technology inspired other investigators to revisit old cases with modern tools. The Millbrook Summer Festival installed a memorial plaque in 2024, honoring Lily Harper and all missing children, and the town holds an annual awareness event on June 14th about child safety. On June 14th, 2024, exactly 38 years after Lily disappeared, Emma returned to Millbrook with Karen and stood at the spot where the face painting booth had been in 1986. "I don't remember this place," Emma said quietly, "but I'm glad I can be here now with you, reclaiming this space from what happened and transforming it into something about healing." Karen placed flowers at the memorial plaque, and mother and daughter stood together acknowledging the decades lost but grateful for the miracle of reunion that statistics said should never happen. Emma's story was featured in documentaries and news programs throughout 2024, inspiring hope for other families of missing children and demonstrating that even after decades, the missing can sometimes be found. The case proved that advances in DNA technology and genealogical databases are solving cold cases that seemed hopeless, and that patience and determination can triumph over seemingly impossible circumstances. Karen lived to see her daughter found, a gift she'd prayed for through 37 years of searching, and she spent her remaining years building memories with Emma and her grandchildren. "I never stopped believing," Karen told a reporter on the one-year anniversary of finding Lily. "Even when everyone said I should give up hope, even when decades passed without answers, I believed she was out there, and someday I'd find her." The yellow sundress that Lily had worn that June day in 1986 was preserved by Karen all those years, and she gave it to Emma as a tangible connection to the little girl she'd been. Emma keeps it in a shadow box in her home alongside photos of herself as Lily, a reminder of where she came from and the journey that brought her back to the mother who never stopped searching. The case of Lily Harper stands as a testament to the power of modern forensic science combined with determined investigation, and as proof that even after 37 years, families can be reunited. And in Millbrook, Ohio, where a 7-year-old girl once vanished from a summer festival, a memorial now reads, "Lily Harper, lost 1986, found 2023, a testament to hope and a mother's love." The story reminds us that DNA technology is solving decades-old mysteries, that patience and refusal to give up can lead to miracles, and that sometimes, against all odds, the lost can be found alive. Emma Richardson Harper Moore lives in Cincinnati with her family, maintaining relationships with both Karen Harper and the Richardsons, creating a life that honors all the people who shaped her journey. And every June 14th, Emma and Karen return to that Millbrook Festival spot, transforming the anniversary of tragedy into a celebration of survival, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter that persisted across 37 years of separation.